Commander William Riker is a linchpin for the Enterprise D. He's Picard's right hand, he will never leave a crew member behind, and he wins the prize for most romantic bridge crew officer on board. In this live stream, we will count down some of Riker's most iconic moments in TNG. So grab your phaser and your transporter twin, and let's start the show. Welcome to the Savage Stream, the weekly live stream where we talk all things Star Trek. And today we are going to be covering the man who taught us the proper way to sit in a chair, William Riker. We're only going to be covering TNG episodes, so we're not going to be covering what happens to him in Picard or what happens to his transporter twin in DS9, but I think we have a lot of material to cover. Now, I want to be clear, we're not covering every Riker episode. We are just covering the top most pivotal moments in his career in TNG. So since we're not going to cover all of them, when we get to the end, if you have one that you love that wasn't in this list, definitely let me know in the comments. By the way, there are timestamps below, so you can jump ahead to any episode at any time. And with that said, let's hit the first episode on the list, which is episode number 7. Season 1, episode 15. 11001001. Riker is enchanted by Minuet, a holographic woman created by the Binars who are upgrading the Enterprise's computer. Little does he know that she's a clever distraction meant to keep him occupied while they hijack the Enterprise to save their own world. After the truth is revealed and their planet is saved, Minuet tragically disappears forever. So this episode I really enjoy. I will admit that everything between Riker and Minuet is super cringy. Like this episode, the way that he's like, how interactive are these holodecks exactly? You're kind of like, okay, if that's your fantasy, that's fine. Just make sure you lock your door. But instead he invites Captain Picard into the experience to be like, look at how real this girl is. She's hot, right? Like, it's a weird moment. That being said, the episode itself is really cool because the Binars, I think, are such interesting aliens as a species. And I love the fact that we get to see them so much in Lower Decks. I mean, granted, they're not like the main thing and they don't even speak, I was going to say English, but like whatever the translator translates to standard, because they're always kind of like chirping and stuff to themselves. However, they're such a cool alien species. So I think for that reason alone, and also the fact that in the episode, we think that they're trying to hijack the ship, but we think they're up to no good. But it turns out they're hijacking the ship to save their world. And so there's a lot of twists where you're like, they're the bad guys. Wait, they're not really the bad guys. They actually need help, but they didn't want somebody to say no. And, there's like so many layers to this. So that's why I think this is a really good episode overall, even though the holodeck stuff's a little cringy. But I also think it's cool that Riker has kind of found his match in this person who he did not design or create or find, but somehow the holodeck just made his perfect person. Unfortunately, she was a construct of the Binars, so when they pull all their tech out of the system, she also goes away. So Riker's like perfect person goes away. But it's still just like an interesting concept, an interesting idea. And we see this played again in Voyager with Janeway's holographic boyfriend. Now that was different because she didn't design him. Tom Paris designed him, but she edited him to make him the perfect boyfriend. And I'm not mad at her for that. I'm not mad at her for that because she is traveling for 70 years on her way back home and doesn't feel comfortable to date anyone on her crew because she's in charge. Although I feel like she could have dated Chakotay. I think everybody would have been okay with that, but that's neither here nor there. So she was using the holodeck technology that I feel like Riker pioneered in this episode. This is a great place to start because we're going to see Minuet come up again. And this also just kind of lays the foundation for Riker being such a charismatic and charming person, but also kind of in this episode, finding his match in a holographic person. It's like he's so good with real living people or people like constructs or whatever. He's so good with human like aliens, women like aliens or whatever, that it's kind of funny that he feels this strong connection to something that, as far as he knows, is like not even flesh and blood, as far as he knows. Is not something that he can take outside the holodeck. Anyways, great starter episode. Not the best Riker episode, which is why it's so low on the list, but still a really good episode. Okay, I'm going to check the chat, and then we're going to hit the next episode on the list. By the way, if you're watching this live, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate having you here. It is actually Christmas Day. Well, technically Christmas night where I am right now. So I suspect a lot of people will be unavailable. Most people will be watching on the replay. So if you're watching on the replay, hello. And again, there's timestamps below so you can jump to the next episode at any time. But I just want to say I appreciate you. I value you. Thank you so much for spending this precious day with me if you're here live. And thank you so much for sharing any moments with me if you're watching on the replay. So I'll check the chat and then we will hit the next episode on the list. Hello, Wind Grace. Hello, Carlos. Yeah, your settings didn't probably didn't tell you this was happening because this was going to be pre-recorded. So I had made a link for the pre-recorded and then I was like, no, I want to do it live. So I had to like delete that one and put this one. So anybody who said notify me didn't get notified. So lesson learned. PS2 Chipper says ho, ho, ho. And Carlos says it's Boxing Day for me, which we don't have that here in LA. But happy Boxing Day. Do people say that? How do you celebrate Boxing Day? I don't know. By the way, PS2 Chipper, is that how you say your screen name? Because I've been saying it wrong for like 6 months. So if I'm still saying it wrong, please correct me so I can say it correctly for the next 6 months. Okay, let's move on to episode number 6 on the list. Season 6, Episode 24, Second Chances. The crew discovers a duplicate of Riker created 8 years ago during a transporter accident, living in isolation on a desolate research base. At first, the two Rikers find it hard to get along, but ultimately, they come to a mutual respect. Lieutenant Riker starts going by his middle name, Thomas, and leaves the ship to walk his own path. So in creating this clip, I hadn't forgotten this episode, right? And that's why it's on this list. It's so quintessential, the fact that Riker gets a transporter double. That's such a big part of his story that we had to have this episode in this list. However, the episode itself is not like the best episode in the world. It's not a bad episode. Don't get me wrong. It's not bad. It's really about Riker and his journey and how do I feel looking at this other Riker who's lived my life and made different choices and made choices I would never have made, so it's more of like an internal battle than it is anything else. And so the plot, like the bigger storyline that this sits in is a little fuzzy. Basically, Riker he was on the Potemkin and he had gone to this Federation research base that was studying something, I don't know. But some ionic storms or something came upon the base. And so they had an emergency beam over and they were trying to beam everybody out of the station. And Riker was the last person to beam off. But through some kind of science-y mess up, some kind of transport accident, one version of Riker was beamed back to the Potemkin and the other one was stranded down on the station for 8 years. So the reason why I'm giving that backstory is that when they come back to the station, they're like, oh, there's this like open window where we can go back to the station and we can recover all this lost data that was on the station because we can access it because of all the storms. So they're like, there's a break in the storm. We can beam back down. We can get all the records and then, fly away or whatever. And maybe the opening is going to last for a week. I don't even remember the details, but the opening is going to last for some amount of time. There's some window that is going to close and they need to beam over there, get the information and beam back. And for reasons, they can't remotely access any of this information. They have to physically send people to this place that we know is hard to get back from to recover this information. So when they beam over, they're like, oh my gosh, it's the second Riker. Oh, this is crazy. Is this really Riker? Is this some kind of mind trip? Is this a fever dream? Is this an alien who's copying me? All of which could be absolutely real because let's keep it real. This is Star Trek. All of that could be legit. So they find out, no, it's the real Riker and all these things. The whole episode, they're still trying to recover this information. And I don't remember, if you remember, let me know in the chat, but I don't remember why this information was important at all. And I remember watching this episode when we were reviewing it for the TNG podcast. Link is in the description or wherever podcasts are found. If you like two snarky girls talking about how much they love Star Trek. But we were reviewing it and I remember being like, why do we need this information? Why is it so important? What is it exactly? It's information on this planet that has storms. That part was a bit of a MacGuffin. It wasn't the main point. That's why it was a little fuzzy. The main point was like the emotional reckoning of, this kind of sliding doors situation of Riker's choices and stuff like that, which is fine. All that to say is the episode's fine. Like it's totally fine. It's perfectly whatever, but it's definitely not the top of the list, right? It's not like, oh man, this episode's so good. I could watch it over and over. However, it's so important. We have to mention it has to be on this list. It has to be on the best Riker list because it has the best Riker moment, which is seeing two Rikers, which is just like, one of the things that made me uncomfortable in reviewing and making the little summary video for you is the scene where he's kissing Troy, which I showed you, where he's just like all over and he's like, and she's just very much not into it. It's just, it makes me uncomfortable every time I see this little clip. I'm just like, oh, they played that perfectly. Like Marina Sirtis, the actress who plays Troy, did such a great job in being like kind of professional and kind of like, oh, like you think we're still a couple and we're very much definitely not a couple. And also, now that I think about it, if they were still a couple, what is Thomas Riker doing making out with William Riker's potential wife at this point? Now that I think about it, I'm like, that was a little presumptuous of him on many levels. But in the storyline, he's like, the thinking of you is what got me through all this time. I couldn't have survived without the thoughts of you and da da da. However, William Riker warns Deanna, because they start going on dates and stuff like that. William Riker warns her, that's still me. And he's going to make the same choices I made, i.e., he is going to choose his career over his love life. He is going to choose promotions over you every time, every day of the week. That is the choice he's going to make. So I just want you to know, because I don't want your heart to be broken again, like that time when I had broken it before. And she's like, yeah, no, I totally get that. But I don't think she totally gets that, because at the end, William Riker is like, peace out, and he's like, I think at some moment he's like, come with me or whatever, but she would have to leave her position on the Enterprise to go be with him while he figures out his life. And she's like, I've worked too hard to be on the flagship. I'm not just going to be following you around Starfleet. Like, no. And he obviously can't stay, because having yourself as your own commanding officer has got to be some kind of Freudian nightmare. He's got to leave. He's got to go make his own way. So, whatever rekindling they had fizzles, and we never hear about him again in TNG. So it seems like Deanna very much moves on, and it seems like Thomas Riker very much moves on as well. So it's a little bit of angst for no reason, but it did get me thinking, and I'm wondering this for you as well. If another version of you came into this reality that had made different choices from you, do you think you would get along with that version? I find that so interesting. Like, would you guys get along? And also, what if you were either in charge of your double, or your double was in charge of you, which is a very different dynamic. And like, just me thinking about it, it really depends. If younger me was in charge of me, I wouldn't be happy with that. But if current me was in charge of younger me, I think she'd actually be good with it. I think she'd be like, okay, cool. But I'm not sure. They actually did this in Prodigy. I just finished all of Prodigy this weekend, where there was a moment of holographic doubles, and most of the doubles did not get along. They could not stand each other, which I think is hilarious, because it's like, in this scenario with the two Rikers, they've lived separate lives for 8 years. So it makes sense that they have become different people because of their different experiences. But in that episode of Prodigy, they were literally just replicated as copies. So they're like current doubles. They haven't had any different experiences, but they still don't get along, and they still clash, which makes sense because the show's about kids. The cast are a bunch of like, kids. And I think as a 13-year-old, I wouldn't get along with 13-year-old me as a 13-year-old either. But there was only one pair of those doubles that actually liked each other. So I just think that's interesting. Like, would you get along with yourself? A very meta analysis. And I'm sure some people will be like, of course. And some people will be like, oh, never. But me just thinking about it, I'm like, it really depends. It really depends on what stage of life you catch me in, whether or not I'd be like, yes, she's great, or I'd be like, hard pass. That being said, I'm going to check the chat, and then we're going to hit the next episode on the list. Just don't say I'm late for lunch. Does Riker say that in this episode? Wingrace says, my two Rikers. Oh, they did a similar clone concept in Farscape. Farscape is a show I have never seen. I have never seen that show. But Netflix tells me that it thinks I will like it, and it's probably right, because it has been pretty right so far. I think there's only one thing Netflix has recommended that I was like, nah, dude, I don't like that. Everything else I've been like, you're spot on. The information has something to do with the plot device. Yeah, I don't think it was important. Like, I don't think the information they needed to get was important. So it kind of makes the whole episode a little flat, right? Because they're like, we got to get it. There's a short window of time. We got to get it. And it's like, but do we? And whatever information they get, what are they doing with that information? Why do we need to get that? And also, once again, why can we not access it remotely? Probably ionic storm, something. I don't think it's still him. 8 years of isolation does a number on the psyche. Seriously. I mean, yeah, genetically, it's still him, but in every other way, it's not him. We mentioned this on the TNG podcast that solitary confinement is one of the worst punishments you can give, aside from physical harm, torture, death, that sort of thing, because of the mental toll that it takes on people to be physically isolated. So I was amazed in this episode that Thomas Riker was not totally insane, or like talking to a beach ball or something, right? He seemed very well adjusted, and he had a slight problem with authority, but that's it. I mean, he was pretty good for having spent 8 years all by himself. I don't even think he had holodeck or holograms or holodeck or anything down there. Yes, I know he does come back in DS9. He does also come back in Lower Decks for a hot second. So we do get a little bit of closure on Thomas Riker. One Grace says, "Oh, I think I would drive myself crazy," right? Carlos says, didn't he join the Maquis double? Yes, the double Thomas Riker did join the Maquis, and that was what was going on with him in Deep Space Nine. He joined the Maquis, and then he pretended to be William Riker, and then got into some shenanigans. As PS2 Chipper says, he tried to steal the Defiance, and then I think ended up in jail for his crime. I was reading that earlier today. I haven't actually seen the episode, so that's what I believe. Wingrace says, "I would definitely recommend Farscape, but it's wild." Yeah, you guys were talking about Farscape in the chat. I don't know if you were part of that conversation, Wingrace, but that's what reminded me, like, oh yeah, Farscape is a thing that I've never seen. So I don't know. Okay, let's hit episode number 5 on the list. Season 5, Episode 17, The Outcast. While investigating a missing shuttle, the crew encounters the Genii, an androgynous species that suppresses gender identity. Riker forms a bond with Soren, a Genii who identifies as female, leading her to be persecuted and ultimately brainwashed to conform. This episode is so good. Like, it's so good. I mean, it's got a lot of gender identity stuff that's just fascinating. And we're hearing about it and learning about it from Riker, who's like the most sexed person on the crew and probably the most in touch with his sexuality, which is just such a fascinating contrast. It's just perfect. He's the perfect person to have these conversations. The ideas, which I think at the time were probably pretty novel. And I remember watching this episode as a kid and being like, oh, how interesting. Like, that's so different. But those concepts still totally resonate today. This is one of those episodes that is just really lasting, which I appreciate. I appreciate when that happens in Star Trek, where you're like, wow, like this story still resonates. This poor person, Soren, is just really caught in a difficult situation. Soren identifies as female, but her entire culture is non-gendered. So for you to feel more female or more male, or for you to desire a more female or more male presenting person, is like, it's illegal. It's illegal. And in the end of that summary, I said she got brainwashed. I don't know, it's some kind of procedure. I don't even remember if they described it all. I don't know if it was surgery or therapy or whatever, but they do like literally change your brain so that you want different things. So there's some kind of procedure they do to make you conform with what everybody else is feeling and what everybody else wants. There's a scene in the episode where Soren gets caught for having feelings for Riker because I forget her boss's name or supervisor's name or who this person is. I think maybe they're like the ambassador. I forget who this person is, but there's this person who is following Soren around everywhere Soren goes and just like spying on her. And then when this person finds out that Soren is a her or feels like a her, they're like, aha, I caught you. And they like bring him to trial. And they're like, we got to brainwash you. Or I think they call it re-educate or something like that. We need to brainwash you. And Soren stands up and gives this passionate speech where she's like, I'm not sick. There's nothing wrong with me. I felt like this my whole life. This is just how I am. I don't need to be changed. I don't need your help. Leave me alone. And it's a really great speech, but does nothing because they brainwash her anyways. And the way we find out is like at the very end, Riker's like, come away with me because Soren is not safe staying there. Not if Soren wants to stay Soren. And Riker's like, come away with me. Just request asylum on the Enterprise and you can come with us. And so Soren's like, yeah, let's do it. And so Riker goes back and is talking to Picard and is like, Soren wants asylum. We gotta give it to her and all this stuff. But Picard's like, Prime Directive, I don't want to interfere with their culture. I don't want to come and cause problems. this is like really sticky and we can't deny asylum, but also like, let me talk to their leader, maybe that same person who was spying on Soren. Let me talk to their leader and see if we can come to some kind of agreement where there's no bad blood. So then Riker beams back down and is like, it's all going to work out. We can be together. But when he sees Soren, Soren is like, I don't have feelings for you like that. I don't care for gendered people. Like, you can tell the brainwashing already happened and he kind of missed his moment. And it's really heartbreaking, at least for me. I know some people are just don't buy this love story, but I really enjoy it. I think it's nice to see a different side of Riker, and he's really interested in Soren because Soren's a cool person. And it's not so much just because she's really, really hot or something like that. Although I'm not going to say that Riker, I don't think Riker's very shallow. I think he's into a lot of different women for a lot of different reasons. He's not Okana, okay, who was just a hot mess. He's not Okana. He's not over just trying to seduce everything that walks. However, he knows what he likes and he knows when he sees something he likes. And I like that he likes Soren. Something about that just makes my heart happy. And this episode's really good. And the conversations you can have after watching it, I think, are what make this episode even better. So it had to make the list. I really appreciate they did this with Riker because they could have done something like this with Data, right? Where he's like exploring gender identity and stuff like that because he's an android. But I like that they picked Riker specifically to have these conversations. I think it was just beautifully done. I'm going to check the chat and then we're going to hit the next episode on the list. PS2 Chipper says, you will love Farscape. Good to know. And then he says attraction versus gender identity. Yeah, there's a scene in this episode where Soren and Riker are talking the whole time about like, what does it mean to not have a gender and what Riker says, like, what's your gender identifier? Because there was no they, them pronouns at the time, because this is what, like 1992. So Riker was like, if it's not him or her, what do we say? And Soren's like, well, we have a word for it, but you don't have a word for it. So there's no translation. And so they're having these conversations throughout where he's like, well, what about this? And what about that? And how does this work? And how does that work? And who leads when you're dancing? And just different things. But then there's this moment when I think they're in the shuttle and Soren is just like, well, there are some of us who feel a little bit more one or the other, to be real. And then Soren confesses, like, I feel a little more female. And Riker smiles and he goes, I had a feeling about that. Which I love. It's like Riker knew you were into him before you knew you were into him, because this is Riker. This is how he just exudes himself just in the world. He already knew. He knew that you were feeling more female and that you were attracted to him. He was right there with you, which is why Riker's just such a character and very consistent. Okay, let's hit episode number 4 on the list. Season 3, episode 9, The Vengeance Factor. The crew intervenes in a feud between the Akamarians and a nomadic faction known as the Gatherers to negotiate peace. Riker discovers that Yuta, an Akamarian servant, is secretly an assassin, seeking revenge for her clan's destruction. When she attempts to kill the Gatherer leader, Riker is forced to kill her to stop the cycle of violence. This episode is so good. Like, it's really good. The Akamarians, the Gatherers are actually hard to look at because their faces are covered with all these really gross boils. And they're always like yelling and talking about how tough they are. So that's a little bit hard to watch. And then the Akamarian leader, who's like all polished and prim or whatever, is a little condescending. So that's a little hard to watch. But just the idea, the storyline is really, really good. And the whole time we're thinking Yuta is like this innocent little servant who will just do whatever you want and just give you whatever you want and all of this stuff. But in the beginning, they find this outpost that's been like where everybody's been killed and it's been ransacked and stuff. And it turns out it was the Gatherers that had attacked this Federation outpost. That's what brought the Enterprise in the first place. Because they were like, they scanned the crime scene and they found Akamarian DNA. And they were like, where's Akamar? We're on our way. So they show up and then the Gatherers ambush them. And then, they get in a phaser fight. It's just like a whole thing. So then the Akamarian leader is like, okay, we've been at war with them for all this time. They're like pirates. They go out around and just like hijack people all the time. They're like a space knife gang or whatever. And Picard is like, how can we have peace between these two factions, between the Gatherers and the, I guess, planet-bound Akamarians? I think there's a way where we can have peace. It's been hundreds of years of blood feuds. And I think it's just time to turn over a new leaf. Because if the Gatherers are allowed to stay on the planet and put down roots and have homes, then they won't need to be pirating the entire galaxy, right? They can stay here and have their own jobs or farms or whatever, but they don't need to be going around attacking outposts and ships and freighters and stuff. So the Akamarian leader was very against it at first, and I forget her name, but she was very against it at first, but Picard kind of like talked her around, and then Picard also talked to the other side, and he was the neutral third party, and so he brought them all to the table. Now, while this is happening, one of the gatherers, people was assassinated, but they didn't know that at first. It just looked like he died of a heart attack. Now, we as the viewers saw that assassination, and we saw it was Yuta. She like catches him in some back alley or whatever and touches his face, I think. And then he falls over and has a heart attack and dies. And so we know that she killed him, but they don't know. Everybody else just thinks it was a heart attack. And somehow Beverly digs deeper. I don't remember how or why, and discovers it wasn't a heart attack. And then as they start going through the records of the people to try to figure out like what is going on, they find these pictures from like 100 years ago. And Yuta's in the picture, looking exactly the same, hasn't aged, still looking like a 22-year-old. And that's when they're like, okay, something is up. And then when they dig deeper and deeper, they find out that Yuta is part of this one clan that was in these blood feuds. And she's the last remaining survivor of this clan. And the leader of the gatherers is other than the person she already killed, the leader of the gatherers is the last surviving member of that clan. And they had a blood feud for like hundreds of years. So her whole thing was that she was genetically engineered so that she would not age and so that her skin secreted a virus that only killed people of that bloodline, like her blood enemy's bloodline. So as long as she touches every single member of their bloodline, she will get revenge. And at the end of her being like so sweet and everything else, when Riker discovers this and beams over right before she touches, the gatherer, she totally changes. She stops being so demure and she's like, look, here's who I am and here's what I'm here to do. And the gatherer is just like, I will kill you. And she's like, not if I kill you first. And, the fangs come out and basically she's like, I will be the last one standing. Like our bloodline is going to outlive your bloodline. And he's like, well, I'm going to kill you before you leave this ship. So our bloodline is going to outlive your bloodline. But really, there's only like 2 of y'all left. So who really wins? And she gives this speech right before Riker blows her into ashes, where she's like, my bloodline's going to outlive you. That's all that matters. And whatever happens to me afterwards doesn't matter. And it's just like, but doesn't it? Like if you outlive him by 3 seconds, who wins? Who will even be around to appreciate that victory? Which is just sad. And I think, that's the moral of the story of blood feuds in the first place, right? Is like nobody wins. There are no winners. But at least when blood feuds have hundreds of participants, you feel like you have some extra people to spare or something. I don't know. When there's only 2 people left, the game's over, right? Like you can't keep playing this game. Anyways, this episode's really good. There's lots of twists and turns. The only part that's a little dumb is when Riker murders Yuta at the end, because Yuta has no weapons. The only thing she has in her hands is a cup of vodka, I think, or tea or something like that. Brandy, that's what it is. She has a cup of brandy. That's all she has. It's not even poison brandy. There's no hot sauce in the brandy. There's nothing that can hurt you from that brandy, okay? She has to physically touch the gatherer to kill him. And he is the only person she is lethal to genetically. She could touch everyone else, every other gatherer in gatherer land, and do nothing. She has to physically touch the skin of this person in order to win. And so when you think about that, and Riker knows this, all he has to do is just like, how little kids, like the older sibling will put their hand on their forehead and the other kid will be like trying to hit them and they can't. That's all Riker has to do. He just has to like stand between her and the gatherer and just like push her, just hold her in place. Problem solved. She's no longer a threat. She doesn't have a weapon. She doesn't have a knife. She doesn't have a phaser. She has nothing. She has to physically touch skin to skin. They could put gloves on her. They could also say, hey, dude, maybe you should leave the room so you don't get murdered right now. And he could just walk away. I mean, there were so many other things that could have happened, but he had to blast her into non-existence for the emotional impact, I guess, of the moment, for him to be like, I really like that girl. And now she's gone. The other thing, too, is he shoots her like 3 times because none of the stun settings are working. And maybe that's part of her genetic modifications that help her to live for so long. It also keeps her kind of resistant to phasering. So unlike when people normally get phasered, even when they get phasered to death, they just kind of go and fall over. but she got the setting to turn to ashes. So she just like dissolved, which is super, super sad. That's the only part of the episode that's like totally unnecessary, but the episode as a whole is very good. And then at the end, we see him being all like, oh, that was so hard. That was such a hard choice. And it's like, yeah, that was a choice you didn't even have to make, though. You didn't have to do that. So could have saved everybody some pain. I don't know what they would have done with Yuta. I guess just imprisoned her, and literally just kept her away from that other guy. So I don't know. But the point was they were at a moment of peace. Now, we don't know whether peace was ever, I don't think. Maybe we do. Maybe we got it in some kind of captain's log at the end. If you know, let me know in the chat. But I don't know if peace was ever established between these two parties, because the whole point was the Yuta Riker thing. So I don't know. But I do know the Akamarians show up again in Lower Decks. They are members of Starbase 80. They are the majority of the people on Starbase 80 are the gatherer side of the Akamarians, so the knife gang side. So, you know, they still exist. I don't know what, are they allies with the Federation? Like, did they ever make peace with their home world? These are questions I don't know and did not look up. However, this episode's legit good. If you haven't seen it in a while, I highly recommend. Just again, keep in mind that the gatherers have these disgusting boils on their face, and that's a little hard to watch. But I just think the idea of it's like this murder mystery, and I love a good murder mystery. So you mix murder mystery with Star Trek, I am there. Okay, I'm gonna check the chat, and then we're gonna go to the third episode on the list. Windgrace says, I hate when I have to disintegrate my girlfriend. How many times have you done that exactly, Windgrace? PS2 Chipper said, what happened to set phasers to stun? Yeah, the phasers were set to stun, and then it was one of those things where Riker like shot, and then she was like, ugh, but then she kept going. So he was like, do, 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 do. And then he shot her again, and she was like, ugh, but then she kept going. And so he goes, do, 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 do. And then he goes, it's set to kill. Don't make me do this. And then she does it again, and then he just like blasts her. Gatherer Land is AKA Starbase 80. I know. So I don't know if they all, you know, gave up their pirating ways to go and live on Starbase 80. Not sure. Carlos says he murdered her, then did he get charged? No, he did not get charged because technically he was keeping her from murdering someone else. So it was like, it was not self-defense, but it was like, I don't actually know what this is called, but no, he didn't get in trouble for that because he didn't kill her in cold blood. He didn't just walk up and phaser her. That'd be a different story. Like, she was actively engaged in trying to kill someone else when he killed her. He just killed her in a way that like was totally, he didn't need to kill her at all. He could have just like picked her up and walked out. But yeah, he didn't get in trouble for that. PS2 Chipper says, what if she's self-immolated? She wouldn't though, because she's been alive for 100 years to end this feud and win this debt. She was not going to go out like that until she touched that guy. Now, I would believe that if she had touched that guy and then he killed over from a heart attack and then she burst into flames of her own accord, I would totally believe that. But I don't think she would do it before touching him. And she was so close, a whole lifetime of revenge. And she was like 3 feet away from her end goal. So I think she would have waited. Okay, now let's hit episode number 3 on the list. Season 6, Episode 21, Frame of Mind. Riker becomes trapped in a disorienting series of hallucinations while performing a play about madness. He can't tell what's real and what's not, or who he is, or where he is. In the end, he resists the mental probing he's been subjected to and manages to beam himself home. This is another really good episode. I talked about this a lot in the live stream about the spookiest TNG episodes. And so I won't cover everything all over again. And I just want to talk a little bit about this because I do think it's a pivotal part of Riker's development. In this episode, we find out that he likes to do Beverly's plays, which is fun. We also get to see really the range of Jonathan Frakes, I feel like, which is one of the reasons why I like this episode so much. We get to see him playing his normal self and his crazy self who thinks he's normal, his normal self who thinks he's crazy, and all these different shifting realities and how he just takes it in stride, right? He's one moment he's in the asylum, next moment he's in the bridge, next moment he's in the turbo lift, next moment he's in his quarters, but now he's back in the asylum. Like, he just kind of rolls with it, but you see him slowly unravel. This is such a well done episode. It's not like fun. It's definitely not a feel good episode. It's not a like, I'm in the mood for something really good and just to raise my mood. This is not the episode for you, But I think it's a really well done episode, a really well told story. And after all of his going back and forth and not realizing what's real, he ends up waking up in real reality. He grabs his comm badge and he gets rescued. Then you see him kind of in the ready room with Captain Picard and Counselor Troy, and he's talking about his experiences and how real it was and how he didn't know which was which. And this is kind of like that Inception moment, right? Where you wonder, does Riker think, am I in reality now? I feel like that's the problem with situations like this, is that you keep going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, that every time you think this is the real one, is this the real one? It's kind of like Freddy Krueger. That movie and that bad guy always terrified me as a kid, because in all of the movies, you never know when you're sleeping or you're awake, right? People are like, I need to stay awake so Freddy Krueger can't get me. But inevitably they fall asleep. But the way they fall asleep is always like, they nod their head and they open their eyes. And so you think they're still awake, but nope, they're asleep. And everything they're experiencing is a dream, which turns into a nightmare, and then they die horribly, right? It's kind of like that, where you don't know if you're awake or you're asleep. So even in the end, when he's talking about his experiences, I always think to myself, is he a little bit like computer in program? You know what I mean? Is he a little bit still wondering if this is real? And then at the very end, he tears down the set from the play, because the play is over. He had already done the play before he was kidnapped and like mind probed. So, but he tears down the set because he's like, I can't sleep knowing this set still exists, because in his delusions, he kept showing up on that set. And then the set was real, and then it was set, and then it was real. And anyways, just a really well done episode. Critical part in his growth, because we get to see how he recovers from losing his mind, which we don't get to see with, I was going to say we don't get to see with all the characters, but we kind of do get to see it with almost all the characters. All the main bridge crew, most of them have at least one episode where they lose their mind. And this is the one for Riker, and I think it's a good one. Okay, that being said, let's hit episode number 2 on the list. Season 4, Episode 8, Future Imperfect. After an away mission goes awry, Riker awakens to find himself 16 years in the future as the captain of the Enterprise, with no memory of the intervening years. However, a series of inconsistencies arise, causing him to realize it's all an illusion. Everything he experiences ends up being an elaborate simulation created by a lonely alien child. See, this is like Frame of Mind all over again. Except for I think this episode, hold on, let me just check. Yeah, this episode happened 2 seasons before Frame of Mind. So that wasn't the first time that Riker was kind of like tricked into thinking something was real, that was all an elaborate hallucination or holodeck program or whatever. But this episode, I love. This episode's also really good. This is not a murder mystery, but it definitely is a mystery. So in the beginning, he's in an away team. It's him, Geordi, and Worf, I believe. They all get gassed. They all get poisoned. And then when he wakes up, it's 16 years in the future. And Beverly Crusher's like, oh, you contracted this virus that like destroys your memory. We don't know how many years are gone from your memory. But we saved you just in time, or something like that. So that's how they explain why he doesn't have a memory of the past 16 years. So they're like, yeah, you actually were married. Unfortunately, your wife passed away. You have a son. You named him Jean-Luc. Like, there's just all of these things. And now the Romulans are our buddies, which is weird. And Picard is an admiral, and Troy still works with him. And it's just like all these things. And so what's fun about this episode is you kind of get a what if. It's kind of like All Good Things, but way back in season 4. So you kind of get this like what if, and where would everybody be, and what kind of scenarios would they be in. But then Riker starts to notice that things are just not making sense. So then all of a sudden it switches up, and the Romulan is like, aha, you've been in our brainwash holodeck program this whole time because we were trying to get secrets from you. But he's still, that kid, Jean-Luc, is still there. But instead it's some other kid who's been captured by the Romulans also, because I guess they capture kids for some reason. I don't know. And now they're both kind of like running through this Romulan ship, and they're trying to get out and all this stuff. And then he goes, wait, this doesn't make sense either. And he's like, all right, that's enough. Like, I know it's you, kid. You're the only consistent thing in all of these hallucinations. So just stop this now. So you come to find out that this kid, this really adorable kid who totally does look like Riker's kid, we find out that this kid is an alien, and that his mom created this technology in order for him to synthesize anything he wants. And I forget the storyline. If you remember, let me know in the chat. But I think it's something like there was something happening in their world or some devastation or something. For some reason, the mom left him here with this technology and she said, I'm going to be back. Either she said, I'm going to be back and she never came back, or she died. One or the other. But she set this up for him because she knew he wasn't going to be able to go home. And it was going to give him all of his emotional needs. So he was able to synthesize everything, but like it's all fake and he knows it's all fake. So at some point it was no longer fun. So when the away team comes along, he did let Worf and Geordi beam back to the ship, but he kept Riker and he like manipulated the situation to try to trick Riker into staying and just loving him and just being his dad and being there with him and being there for him. And so he created this elaborate scenario where they could be together and go on adventures together and all of that. And so when Riker discovers this, he's just like, how about this instead? How about you turn all of this technology off? You come with me on the Enterprise and you stop being alone in this cave and you can be around other individuals. And so the little alien is like, okay. And he's like, I'm really sorry for what I put you through. And then he like changes his appearance to like that classic X-Files alien, you know, with like the gray skin and the big eyes and the heart-shaped or the teardrop-shaped face. It was like so classic 90s alien, which is funny because we never see those classic alien looks on Star Trek, even though it's a show all about aliens, right? We never see the like, the truth is out there aliens. Anyway, except for this one episode. Anyways, he shows his real form and he says, my name is whatever it is, Baruch or something, he says. He's like, okay, well, this is like my real name now that I'm being honest. And Riker goes up to him and says, well, to me, you'll always be Jean-Luc, which is the name of his fake kid. And then he's like, 2 to beam up. And so we never get a where are they now for this kid unless he shows up in Lower Decks, which he probably does. And I don't remember. Most likely that kid shows up in Lower Decks and I just missed it. But I think this episode is really well done. Again, a really interesting mystery. Totally believable that the Romulans are up to some shenanigans and messing with his mind. And that it turns out to be the kid and not the Romulans is a nice twist. And then it turns out that that kid's not even a human kid, but an alien kid who's just looking for a dad. I mean, there's so many layers on this. It's beautifully done. It's a really fun ride. They make Riker look so handsome as an older man. And they do not make Picard look very handsome as an older man. So I don't know what, they always make him look like Scrooge to me. But so I don't know what was going on with that. But I just love, you know, how Riker matures in this episode. Also, he mentions his relationship with his own dad, you know, and he's like, I have to be there for you, Jean-Luc, because I know my relationship with my dad was trash. And I don't want to repeat that same pattern with you, which is just like a lot of growth and really beautiful considering he was not trying to settle down with Deanna so that he was trying to have a kid. It's just like, yeah, maybe it took 16 years for him to get there. But it's just kind of growth as a person, right? To be like, you know what, I actually want more than a career. Career is great. And pursuing that is wonderful. And I'm the first one to tell you, like, go for what you want in the world. And at the end of the day, it's about who we share it with. That doesn't have to be a kid. It doesn't have to be a spouse, but it should be other humans or humanoids. You know, there should be other people because we were just talking about how harmful isolation is on the psyche, right? And it's just important to have people to share life with, which is why I love having you here where I can share my passion about Star Trek with other Trekkies. Like, how fun is that? I love stuff like this for that reason. So this episode's really good. If you have not seen Future Imperfect for a while, I highly recommend rewatching that one. That's a really good episode, in my opinion, and it's one of Riker's best. So we have one episode left on the list, an episode that I've mentioned many times because it is one of my favorites of all of TNG, and it just happens to be a Riker-focused episode. But before we go to that, I want to check the chat really quickly. Let's see. PS2 Chipper says, should give that alien a transporter clone. I know. Now that alien has 2 aliens. That'd be kind of cool if that alien had a transporter clone and then that clone had the same abilities as him, right? Like could also create whatever and then they create stuff together. But still, I think like you need more than one other person and you certainly need more than just yourself because that's part of that same insanity when you're in isolation. You just have yourself and it's like too much of an echo chamber. But yeah, that's funny. PS2 Chipper says that ending gave me the feels. Seriously, it's really sweet and it's really short. It's just like a few, I don't even know if it's like 2 whole minutes of their end conversation, changes back into alien. Riker's like 2 to beam up, they beam up, credits. Like you don't even have time to really digest it. And I don't know. I always want just like a little bit more, not for them to say anything or do anything. Maybe to see them show up in the Enterprise. I don't know what I want, but like I want to linger in that feeling just a little bit more. And it hits credits so fast that you're just like, what just happened. Great episode though. Yes, Wingrave says, I love Riker getting to tell Picard to shut up. And he does it so aggressively in this episode. He's like, shut up. And Admiral Picard is like, excuse me? And he's like, or no, he says like, what did you say to me? Or something like that. And Riker's like, close your mouth and stop talking. And you're like, oh my word. Like, that's when you know he's not in the prime line. He knows something is up because he would not talk to Picard so disrespectfully. And then Deanna's all like, Will, I can see that your feelings are very all over the place. Whatever I can see that you're angry and upset or whatever she says. And he's like, back off, Deanna. This ends now. And he has like this big speech. Yeah, it's really intense. I was actually shocked again when I heard that scene again today. I was like, oh, I forgot how strongly he said that. I felt that. Okay, now going to the number 1 episode on the list for the best Riker episodes. Can you guess it? Season 7, Episode 12, The Pegasus. Riker confronts his past when the Enterprise is tasked with recovering the long-lost ship Pegasus. After finding the ship half-phased into an asteroid near Romulan space, Riker finally confronts Captain Pressman about continuing to develop illegal cloaking technology. Picard exposes the truth to the Romulans, and trust between him and Riker is restored. One of my favorite episodes of all time of TNG. I think I did a whole live stream of my favorite TNG episodes. This might have been like 10 on the list of top 10, but it's on that list. I know for sure it's on that list. This is one of my favorite episodes. I love everything about this episode. I love the intrigue. I love the mystery. There's a lot of conflict between Riker and Picard, which you just don't see other than the episode we just mentioned in Future Imperfect where Riker tells Picard to shut up. Most of the time, they're on the same page, and that's what makes Riker such a great first officer. But in this episode, there's a lot of conflict. You know, it reminds me of not the episode Conspiracy, but the episode that sets up Conspiracy. We just talked about it last week in the timing of this recording. It's what is it? Final no. It'll come to me. But there was some episode. It was the episode where Wesley tries to get into the academy, but he doesn't get in. In that episode, Admiral Quinn and Lieutenant Commander Remick come on board to do this investigation because they think that Starfleet has been corrupted somehow. And so they want to make sure that the Enterprise and all of its crew are not corrupted because they are the flagship. So in that episode, Quinn tells Picard that they have to do this secret investigation, but not to say anything. So Remick goes around being a total dick to everybody on the ship and just being really mean and really aggressive and getting in all their business because he's trying to, do a witch hunt and figure out who's the bad guy, which it turns out that it's nobody. And then at the end, he has the nerve to tell Picard, like, I would love to be stationed on your ship. And Picard's like, I'll take that under advisement. Please get on the transporter pad. And anyway, so in that episode, we do see conflict between Riker and Picard because Picard knows what's going on, but he's not allowed to say anything. And we really see conflict between everybody and Remick because Remick's a jerk, and a little bit of distrust between Picard and everybody. But for the most part, they're always on the same page. In this episode, the tables have turned. Now Riker knows something Picard doesn't know, and Riker's not allowed to say anything. And Picard is like, I pulled all these strings at Starfleet to figure out what's going on, but I could only get like the littlest bit of information. Number one, you have to tell me what's going on. And Riker's like, I can't say anything. I suggest you ask the Admiral. And Picard yells at him and he goes, well, I'm asking you. And Riker's like, I can't say anything. I'm sorry. Right. And Picard's like, okay, that's fine. He's an admiral. He outranks me. I totally understand. But after this whole crisis is done, I'm going to need to think about the organization of my ship. Something like that. Or basically he's like, I'm going to fire you after this because I can't trust you or you won't open up to me or whatever. Which is interesting because Picard's Mr. Rules guy. So I guess he wants to be Mr. Rules guy when he's the one keeping other people in the dark. But when he's being kept in the dark, it's a different story. Especially when he feels like what they're doing could endanger the ship, which he does because the Romulans are out there, all the things. Anyways, this episode's amazing. There's lots of layers. Riker was an ensign on the Pegasus, and he defended Captain Pressman's actions because he was really green, fresh out of the academy. You know, you follow your captain, you obey them no matter what. But now he's grown. Now he's a first officer, and he's experienced a lot of things. And now he knows what it's like to call a captain on their BS. And he has that kind of relationship with Picard. And Picard chose him specifically because he questions orders. There's this whole beautiful conversation between Pressman and Picard about what they look for in other command officers under their command. And Pressman was like, I need somebody who follows my orders, no questions asked. They do what I say, da 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 da. And Picard's like, no, I need somebody who questions my orders, who makes sure, double checks what I'm thinking, what I'm saying, to make sure that it's all on the right page and that we're doing the right thing. I don't always listen to them, but I want to hear other people's opinions. And I don't think either one of these is a bad leader, by the way. I think it's very situational. Would I rather work for Picard than Pressman? Any and every day of the week, because Pressman's shady AF. But his style of saying, I need somebody who will follow orders in a dangerous situation is legit, especially in a military organization, which Picard says it's not, but it is. In a military organization, sometimes you just need to follow orders because it's a life or death situation. It kind of reminds me of Chain of Command, where we get Captain Jellicoe, who I was surprised to see Captain Jellicoe was so prevalent in Prodigy. I was like, this mofo. But anyways, with Captain Jellicoe, his command style is very much my way or the highway, which I also despise. I would hate to work under Captain Jellicoe. But in that little bubble, in the scenario in which he was put in charge for this one mission, he was probably the best person for the job. And he got it done. Similarly with Pressman, his style of command, I think, can be really good depending on the situation. I don't think he's the right fit for the Enterprise in general, because Picard has created kind of this like family feel. He's always asking for options from the bridge crew. He welcomes their feedback and ideas. He's got an open door policy. So he's just like a totally different style of leader, and he's kind of trained the crew to be this way. So I think Pressman would be a bit of a disaster. There'd be like a lot of turnover and a whole bunch of retraining to work under him. However, I don't think it's wrong to have people who just follow orders when it's a life or death situation. So if you say like, get out of the house, get out of the house, it's about to explode or whatever, but it's really interesting. This is why this is the best. For one reason, it's one of my favorite episodes, but another reason why I think it's the best Riker episode is because of the growth we see in Riker in this one episode. We don't actually see him as ensign babyface, but we hear a lot of stories about what he was like as an ensign, and we know what he's like as a first officer. And that contrast is really powerful, and I love to see the growth. It also reminds me of that episode. I don't remember the name of it, but it's the episode with Picard where Q, it's kind of like the It's a Wonderful Life episode where Q has him go back and relive his cadet life without getting stabbed in the heart. And you see like what he was like as a youth versus what he's like now. And he's like, oh, I was so brash and I was so like, just out of control and all these things. And now I'm like this diplomatic person who's always doing negotiations and all these things and so calm and in control of my emotions. But he kind of had to be that brash youngster to become the person he is now. That's similarly with Riker. Like he had to go through this Pegasus incident very shortly after graduating from the academy so that he could come into his own and realize like, oh my gosh, your captain's not always right. This is what taught him that. Your captain's not always right. And following orders, like you follow orders until the orders are unethical, and then you don't follow them. And that either means a mutiny, which means you get whatever punishment you get. I think in piratey days, the punishment was walking the plank. I don't know what the punishment is now, but I think mutiny is usually like a death sentence. But for Starfleet, I'm guessing it's penal colony ? I don't know. If you know what the punishment for mutiny is, please let me know. But you could mutiny, or you could mutiny and then everybody mutinies and then like nobody mutinies. Like it doesn't count, right? Because the captains, or in this case, the admiral, whatever, they're the ones who are wrong. And so then nobody gets in trouble for mutinying. But you have options. You don't just blindly follow orders without questioning and without thinking. And Riker needed this experience in order to learn that lesson, which is what made him a better commander, and which is the only reason he was stationed on the flagship in the first place. That is the literal reason why Picard picked him, because he can think for himself and stand up for himself and argue both sides. And we see him do this time and time again. I'm thinking about Time's Arrow, when Picard was lost in the past and Riker needed to bomb the cavern, so that the aliens wouldn't keep devouring people from Earth's past. And he was like, we got to go get the captain. And Worf was like, the captain would want us to close this cavern. That's what we've been doing. Like, we need to close it. And Riker's like, no, I'll go back. I'll get him. Like, he's so consistent. Every time somebody's left somewhere, even if it's not the captain, doesn't matter who, Riker's like the first one to be like, we're going to go get them. We're going to do whatever it takes. And I love that about him. Okay, I'm going to check the chats, and then we are going to wrap up this Christmas edition. Let's see. PS2 Chipper says, that was a great episode. Agreed. Picard also wants to be the boss. Yes, Picard absolutely wants to be the boss, and Picard is the boss. And I think it's interesting seeing him interact with Pressman because Pressman is an admiral, so he does outrank him. But they don't feel like they're mismatched to me, like in their interactions. They feel like two peers having drinks and chit-chatting, which is very different from whenever he's talking to Admiral Nechayev because he and Nechayev just don't like they just don't seem like friends. Like there seems like there's always this power imbalance and it's just weird. Him and Admiral Quinn though are like buddies, right? Like they're like way more pals than Pressman because they actually know each other. So yeah, it's interesting to see their dynamic together. Wingrave says, I bet Thomas Riker would still side with Pressman. Honestly, I side with Pressman. I think the Federation should have cloaking technology, and I don't understand why they don't. And they're always like, oh, because we signed a treaty. In this episode, Riker's like, we signed that treaty in good faith, and we agreed that we would never develop cloaking technology. And then I think in Prodigy, somebody, maybe Captain Janeway or Admiral Janeway says, there's 3 treaties about why we're not going to do cloaking technology or something like that. But I still don't get it. I don't understand why they don't have cloaks. I don't get it. I think they should. So while I love this episode and while I think Pressman is the worst, I do agree with him that Starfleet needs cloaking technology. The problem is he's doing it all illegally because they're not supposed to do it because they agreed they wouldn't do it. And all of it's a big secret. And even when they come out with the cloaking technology, they can only use it in secret ways where nobody can find out because it's illegal. So that's more the problem, right? Is that like, it's not legal. I don't think the problem is we shouldn't have cloaking technology because they should. The problem is it's illegal and you're doing it in the shadiest way possible. So I agree with you. I think Thomas Riker would side with Pressman. PS2 Chipper says, which producer turned Starfleet into the military? Well, it's always kind of been military, right? That's the whole, like, their whole thing about starships is that they're taking that from, like, sailing ships from the Navy. So everything about Starfleet is kind of based on the Navy. So the fact that they have ranks, the fact that they have wars and battles, that they are the flagship, they're the first ship to go into battle, like all of that's pretty military. So I guess, I don't know, Roddenberry? Yeah, but I know TOS was not so much like that. It wasn't so hierarchical, I think. Well, I don't really know because you guys know I'm not the TOS expert. But definitely there was a lot of hierarchy that is introduced into TNG that kind of continues on throughout the other shows. Like, I don't know, in TOS, did they ever go to Starfleet Command? Did they have admirals show up and tell them what to do? Was there a bunch of admins butting in? I don't know. Let me know in the chat. I'm not sure. PS2 Chipper said, I remember Roddenberry arguing with a producer over the military nature of Starfleet. I don't remember that. So you would know more than me about that situation. Which is why Thomas is not Will after 8 years of isolation. Yeah, I mean, it's just, I think that one's more the isolation that keeps them different more so than the militarization of Starfleet. Because it's definitely a military organization by the time we see it in TNG. Like that's already been done. Wingrave says, I think it was the Wrath of Khan when they started transitioning into more of a military organization. Okay, that makes sense because that was like a major war, right? Like a major battle. So I guess this is so interesting. Okay, PS2 Chipper says it's the Doomsday Machine episode. Yeah, you know what? I never actually thought about that. I never thought about the fact that TOS is a totally different vibe. I mean, I did that it's a different vibe as far as the crew and the missions they go on. But I never thought about how TOS is not super military or militaristic, but TNG is very hierarchical and militaristic. And from TNG on, it continues to be that way. However, Deep Space Nine has more civilians. Voyager, they're in the Delta Quadrant. So they're still military, right? They still have rank and they still have lots of fights, but there is no, like, Janeway doesn't have to talk to a single admiral. She never has to run her decisions by anybody. No one's telling her what to do. It's not until season 7 when they start to communicate with Earth where she starts to get missions and stuff. And I was really surprised because I recently just finished watching Prodigy. I was really surprised to see what Janeway would be like in the Alpha Quadrant. Like, what is she like? Does she listen to her commanding officers? Does she not? Is she always fighting with that? Like, I was really curious. It was fascinating to watch, because in Voyager, she doesn't have that. So it's still a military organization, but there's no fleet, right? Like, it's just them. The only time I think we see that before season 7 is in the episodes Year of Hell, parts 1 and 2, which are so good. They're so good. Where there's a war. Again, there's a battle. And so Janeway finds these allies and then gives them the protective shielding from the time weapon. But even then, there's like there's military formations, right? It's like formation, attack, Alpha, Bravo, whatever. And they get like in their little formations to attack and stuff like that. All that's very militaristic. So that's super interesting. I never thought about that. PS2 Chipper says Wrath of Khan was about the Genesis device. Yeah, I never really thought about the fact that there's a transition. Anyways, thank you so much for joining me. That is my list of the 7 top best Riker episodes that really show his personality, some of the main points of his storyline in TNG. Thanks so much for spending your time with me. If you join me live on Christmas Day or Christmas night or Boxing Day or the first night of Hanukkah or whatever you may be celebrating or not celebrating tonight. And if you're watching on the replay, thank you so much for watching the replay. You made it to the end. Join me next week, where we're going to be talking about the best Picard episodes. And then the week after that, we're going to be talking about the best Worf episodes. Both of those just from TNG. So we're going to be talking about best Picard episodes in TNG. We're not going to be talking about best Picard episodes of Picard. And then for Worf, we're just going to be talking about him in TNG. We're not going to be talking about all the Worf episodes in Deep Space Nine and all the Worf episodes in Picard. And those will be live. If you're watching on the replay, though, those might already be live. So you could probably just watch them right now. Merry Christmas. Happy holiday. Where's the mistletoe? Riker has it. And I will see you next time. Live long.